So glad you're all here. I'm Lisa Fain, CEO of Center for Mentoring Excellence. You are here. I think we're on episode 12, right, Michelle, of the Thought Leader.
14.
Wow, we've hit the dirty dozen, as they say, or beyond. And these are our monthly conversations with thought leaders in various fields that are adjacent to, complementary to, overlapping with mentoring. And I'm really delighted about our guest today. Well, today we're here to talk about hybrid communication, and I'm so excited to talk to Darien, who's really an expert on human and human connection. She knows humans well, she knows human connection well, and she and I are going to share our thoughts on what this means for hybrid communication. But let me tell you a little bit about Darien before we dive in. Darien's a certified executive coach and trainer. She started her career as an attorney in Boston. And after 7 years of practice, she transitioned to professional development, where she directed the learning and development initiatives, including mentoring programs at multiple law firms. She spent her entire career in the legal industry and has spent over 15 years feeding her passion, which is training and developing individuals in critical interpersonal skills and coaching people to determine, set, and achieve their goals. She enjoys being in the front of the room and engaging participants in learning, and trains on a wide range of topics, including communication, delegation, feedback, networking, mentoring, imposter syndrome, and resilience. So she's here this morning, Pacific time, this afternoon, wherever, for those of you on the East Coast or the Central Time Zone, to give us her insights on mentoring in a hybrid workplace. She doesn't hold herself out as a hybrid expert, but she really is an expert of somebody who's in tune with humans and human connections. So Darien, we are so excited to have you with us today for our thought leader conversation. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here, and I love to see your faces on video. Thanks for those who are showing me your faces. I can see when things are landing, when things are not. It's great. Hi, thanks for having me, Lisa.
So glad you're here. All right. Well, let's just dive right in, because this is an issue that we think a lot about at Center for Mentoring Excellence, because our clients often, I would say more often than not, have hybrid workplaces and are looking for ways to really leverage that. So how do you view the shift to hybrid work having impacted overall employee productivity and satisfaction?
Yeah, so the research on this is plentiful. So if you really want to understand sort of how hybrid work is impacting organizations, I highly recommend going to Gallup. Gallup they're the pollsters, and they've been studying workplace engagement for the last number of years, 50 years, okay? And so obviously when we move to a hybrid environment, they were very keyed into how this is impacting our employees. And the truth is, it is having an impact, right? It can't not. The biggest challenge for folks in the hybrid environment, according to Gallup's research, is that folks are having a hard time with the technology, the effectiveness of their work. Do we have the right tools in place? And so sometimes there's a disconnect between what they're able to do at the office and what you're able to do at home. When we have that gap, when we don't have that gap and it's seamless, people feel really good about their hybrid work environment. Also, folks are feeling, which makes sense, that their connectedness to the organization and the culture has shifted. And it's harder to keep the organizational culture alive in a hybrid environment. And so we see that as a challenge. But I also want to point out that so many good things are happening in this hybrid workplace. We are seeing less burnout. People feel more in control of how they're spending their time, because I can do a load of laundry at the same time I'm working, right? I can take a 5-minute break to go turn my laundry over, and now my weekend can be relaxing instead of doing chores. So people really like having that flexibility and having the efficiency in their time. And I will tell you, the research shows productivity is going up. Okay, so if you're worried that productivity is going down, that is not what Gallup's research shows, right? And people feel happier because they're able to have some flexibility in their workspace. Now, it's harder on companies because of this culture challenge, because of the need for the technology. So we do have a natural tension, but I think the research would support that the hybrid workplace is really good for employees, really good for employees.
I get excited when I think about the impact from in terms of creating an inclusive workplace. I mean, I think in terms of gender, I think in terms of ability, especially invisible disabilities, right? Just the, all of that, as well as, you know, uh, family status and all of those things, right? I just think it's so powerful. Geography as well.
Geography is a big one, Lisa.
Yeah.
Geography is a really big one because
Mhm.
we're now having to think about um, what I call synchronous versus asynchronous communication, right? Email is technically an asynchronous communication tool. So you can respond when you're ready to respond, rather than having to respond immediately versus synchronous communication, the face to face. And I think what you're saying, Lisa, and I 100% agree, is that geography now is less important
Mhm.
because, right, we're all scattered about
Yeah.
and we can use, but we have to use our tools. We have to use our tools effectively. And I do think that is part of our challenge in a hybrid workplace. I don't think we're setting proper rules of engagement right now around what tools we should be using for what types of communication and when. But if we do it properly, it can be brilliant.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you and I may have talked about this the first time we spoke, Darien, but I'm always fascinated that at least here in Seattle area, some of the major employers are saying you have to be in the office for X number of days, because that's how we build a culture. And I wonder whether that's not uh, short-sighted in the sense of maybe what we need is to equip our leaders with different communication skills, right? And see if we can be engaging. I'm not saying that there's not value to being in person. I think there is some value to being in person sometimes. But I wonder if what's really required are kind of heightened and different skills for leaders. I'm wondering your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I happen to work with many, many people who have, my law firm environments where many of my law firms are scattered across the country. And so they've always had to work cross office, not sitting next to the person. And they've done so effectively because of what you're talking about. They've had to have better communication. Do they get together once or twice a year? Yes, once or twice a year to build relationship, but then otherwise they're meeting virtually and they have been doing that prior to the pandemic. So I 100% agree that if our leaders were more tuned into how to build effective relationships virtually, how to
Mhm.
use the tools that we have, how to use Zoom properly, how to use team meeting properly, how to use one-on-one properly, we would be able to keep the culture without needing to be in 3 days a week or 4 days a week. Yeah, I think it's possible.
Yeah. Yes, and also how to have informal conversations virtually, right?
Yeah.
So you can have the formal, I mean, certainly you have to be able to have the formal conversations virtually, but even how do you create that connection? So let's talk a little bit more about that because there are some key challenges in hybrid work. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about what those are and how those can be addressed.
Yeah, well, I think you just hit on it, right? Which is we don't have as many opportunities for organic connection.
Mhm.
And when we are not seeing someone in the hallway, we're not standing at the refrigerator office, refrigerator, we don't have those just spur of the moment conversations. And that really did help build community prior to the pandemic, right? We really enjoyed that. Who am I going to run into when I walk the hall to the bathroom? And so I like to think about, people keep telling me, oh, I don't have any time. I can't build relationship because everything has to be so intentional and formal. And I like to separate the two.
Mhm.
Yes, it does need to be more intentional, but that doesn't mean it has to be formal, right? Intentionality doesn't mean rigidity. Intentionality means I'm putting it on our schedule so we don't miss the opportunity, but then we can have an informal chat. Nothing prevents us from having informal dialogue through scheduled connection. And so
Mm,
I really think if we can start separating the two, informal versus intentional, we're going to have a better time at this, right?
yeah,
And so you don't have, everything doesn't have to be heavy. Everything doesn't have to be formal, just because you have scheduled the meeting, right? And so thinking about how many scheduled meetings that are formal with agenda we have, how many informal scheduled meetings we have, how many team meetings we have, how many team workshops we have. These are the things you really need to be planning out that I think will help with that hybrid communication challenge of lack of the organic approach.
yeah.
Is
I
that
wonder,
helpful?
super helpful. You know, there is something to be said also about equipping leaders with the art of conversation. Because if informal ends up being like, so, how are you? Right? What'd you do this weekend? I mean, there's not that there's not value in that, but you got to get deeper in informal connection in order to connect. And so it doesn't just feel like a drive-by.
Yeah. So I talk to my leaders a lot about this notion about being curious. It's hard because leaders feel like a lot of my leaders will tell me, I feel like I need to know. I need to know everything. I need to have all the answers. And it's like, well, no, when it comes to other humans and what's happening with them and what matters to them, you don't need to be the expert. They're the expert in their own lives. So get curious about them, get curious about their lives. And that means asking really powerful questions that you actually don't know the answer to, right? What is your view outside your window? What are you looking at day to day? What do you look forward to at the end of the day when you're going to go outside your office? These are really powerful questions that get people sharing. So not knowing the answer, I think actually leads to much better human connection. And to give yourself some grace, leaders, you don't need to know. It's better if you don't. It will help you engage in more meaningful conversation, I think.
And two-way sharing, right? If it's just a leader, like, thank you for coming to my office hours, but tell me, what's your superpower?
Mhm.
It feels like an interrogation, it feels like a deposition, right?
Yeah, and
As
we
opposed,
leaders have that challenge, right? They're afraid to share.
yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. I often use the analogy of a Pacific Northwest stop sign. What happens at a Pacific Northwest stop sign?
Everyone waits.
Everyone, no, you go, no, you go, no, you go,
Yeah,
right? It's like in order to have the true art of conversation, somebody's got to be the first mover.
yeah,
Um, so
yeah, that's
Susan has a great comment in the chat. Let me just acknowledge that and read it out loud for those who are um, watching the recording. She said, our team has a once a week virtual cafecito. Whoever can come and no work talk, just life updates and random conversations. I love that, Susan. What do you think about that, Darien?
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. And I actually think that teams who do these sorts of things are the more cohesive teams. Things like having virtual contests. Everyone submit their pet. We all get to have pets. We get to submit recipes, our family recipes. Understand, we're trying to create psychological safety on teams, and it begins with belonging. And any moment you can create that creates that moment of belonging, a cafecito, which is everybody sharing about their life, makes me feel like I belong somewhere. And once I have that sense of belonging, I'm going to be way more likely to engage in the critical thinking, the sharing of my ideas that are outside the box, which leads to better organizational health, right? But I'm not going to share any of that if I don't feel like I belong. And I get it. We're talking about hybrid workplace because people don't feel like they belong, and we're trying to understand how we get belonging. These are the ways we get more belonging, so that you get the added benefit of that innovation and willingness to share without feeling retaliated or retribution for sharing something that, is new.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. There's also like all sorts of great tools now that people can use. There's conversation cards. We have a power questions. Having a tool to help facilitate informal conversations is also great. Like I love the idea of submit your pet photos or best vacation or what's the best thing you're reading or watching or where you really do start to have fuel for those conversations. Do you find those tools to be stilted or are they useful in your experience, Darien?
I think that lots of adults complain, and I think they say, oh, so silly.
Yeah.
And when it's gone, they're sad. So
Yeah.
I think you've got to use them. I don't think you use them all the time. I think you use them sparingly, but I absolutely think that when we don't have it, they are sad. So often I feel like people in the position who are running mentor programs, running any sorts of programs, the way what I think is important is to think about your job is to provide water.
Mm.
You can't force someone to drink it, but if you don't provide it, they will surely die, right? So providing the water, and we hope that people will drink it. And that's how I approach all of the work that the folks who are leading these sorts of programs to do. Just constantly remind yourself, it's water, it's water, it's water, it's water, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a good way to keep yourself motivated in this. People will complain, but I promise you, they really love it. They really love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, two things in this chat. Linda asked if we can share our power questions. We absolutely can. Michelle, would you find the link and throw that in the chat for people? Annette says, I'm not sure I understand. I'm in a university setting, and in our environment, those kind of questions about what one is doing after work or what pet one has or getting together to share informally would most often be perceived as intrusive. In my environment, where those sorts of in my environment, those sorts of things would not be welcomed. How do you open up conversations in a very structured and formal environment? Thoughts about that?
Yeah, I often find that a lot of times people are worried about. So what I'm hearing, Annette, is that there's not psychological safety, right? And so I don't feel like I can share these things about myself. So we start with pretty innocuous. You start with pretty innocuous stuff. I actually don't think the pet is. I think that's pretty innocuous. Does anyone have a pet? But I think you have to start light and then get deeper. And it can also help if you set it up in advance so it's opt-in. That way, and people understand what's coming. Sometimes I can get myself settled into, okay, we're going to be sharing our pet next week, and maybe I'm comfortable with that. And I have a week to decide, right? So giving people some time and space to see if they're willing to do that. They can talk to a friend. Are you sharing your picture? I don't know. I'm going to share my picture. That's how I would suggest doing it. I generally, though, do advise on not going too personal, like, where were you raised and how many siblings do you have? And tell me, what it was like growing up. That's a little deeper and probably too deep for sharing at this level.
I love the metaphor of a apartment building, right? So, in terms of like how to get to the level of conversation. So there's like lobby level conversations where you meet somebody in a lobby, which is, how's the weather? How was your weekend? Um, you know, in Seattle, did you catch the Seahawks? Whatever it is, right? Those kind of things. And it would be really inappropriate in the lot to run into somebody in the lobby and ask them their views on immigration reform, right? Right. And so the idea is you want to be riding up the level of the elevator as you get more familiar. Similarly, if you've known somebody for a while and you're hanging out in their apartment, just the question about like, so how was your weekend? What did you catch the Seahawks? Isn't going to get you far enough in terms of connection. So you want to build safety and ask the appropriate level. And that's what helps you travel up the elevator to the level.
It's a really great analogy. It's a really great analogy. And notice we had the cafecito where everyone can opt in those are, I mean, opting in, I think, is the way you do it. And then I will tell you, I think that people see the community that's being built and they want to continue. They want to be part of that.
I love that. I love that. Annette, does that help clarify or give you any spur any thoughts as to how to implement this in your world? Susan also adds in the chat that she worked at universities for 20 years and found the same thing. She did find that getting to know each other conversations could be received better if it was framed around work and dreaming of research sharing resource ideas for others. Lovely frame. Thank you so much, Susan. Darien, I want to move to the idea of feedback, which is going to give us a bridge, I think, to starting to talk about this in the context of mentoring. What role do you see that regular feedback plays in creating this connectivity and maintaining effective communication in hybrid model?
Okay, so I'm a feedback junkie. I love to talk nothing more than feedback. Feedback's my favorite topic of conversation. I don't actually think feedback changes in a hybrid workspace versus a, all in office or all remote. I think we need feedback, we need feedback, we need feedback, we need feedback, period, all the time. I think the challenge is right now we have very different generations in the workplace, right? We have 4 generations in the workplace. And it's causing challenges because not everybody has rules of engagement around how we give and receive feedback. Our Gen Zs want feedback, particularly positive feedback, right? And our old guard, they are not used to giving positive feedback, right? If you don't hear from me, that's good news, right? And we don't really want that. So we want something in between, right? And so I believe in establishing rules of engagement, and I teach my lawyers this all the time. Here's how it's going to go. We're going to do a case together. We're going to do a project together. And afterwards, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to give you feedback. What worked, what didn't. We'll talk about the good. We'll talk about the bad, right? We'll brainstorm tools, but we're talking about how we're going to do it so that everyone is on board about how we're going to give and receive feedback. I will tell you, I think part of the challenge is a lot of the newer generation wants to give upward feedback, right? I want to say, this isn't working for me. And when we're building relationship, the way I like to have more junior people give feedback to more senior people is to frame it in rules of engagement, right? Here's what I've noticed. It's difficult to get a hold of you. And I'm wondering if I can send you an email or, send you a text message if there's an emergency. So we're giving feedback around how we're communicating with one another. And it's not feedback. It's like, what would work better for our relationship? And I think that that's a way for more junior people to give upward feedback without ruffling too many feathers. So thinking about, and we can avoid junior people needing to give upward feedback if we establish the rules up front, right? And so I want to encourage everyone to think about rules of engagement. If you want examples of what those are, I'm happy to give it to you. But that's what I think is helpful.
Yeah, that maps with our model too of the learning centered model of the mentoring cycle, which is the negotiating or the establishing agreements phase early on. We hear so frequently in mentoring relationships when, somebody will call us and say, this has gone wrong or it's fizzled or my mentee isn't getting me or my mentor isn't getting me or they won't show up. I say, well, what did you say when you established agreements? Oh, what? We didn't do that. Well, let's go back and set the rules of the road. Because although it feels awkward at the beginning, it definitely helps keep the relationship strong. And by the way, it fast tracks that psychological safety and trust that we were talking about before.
100%, 100% it fast tracks it because I feel comfortable in how we're going to communicate. You told me that I'm not to be on my phone during our mentor meetings. Great. You told me I could text you when I had an emergency. Wonderful. You told me it's best to use email if I don't expect a response for, at least 2 days. Great. You told me that I should be replying within 2 hours. Wonderful. We all know what's expected rather than sitting there and spinning. Am I allowed to send a text message? I don't really know if I should. Maybe I should use DM. Like, stop.
Oh yeah. You'll step in 100% of the landmines that you don't know exist.
That.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about bridging this over into mentoring relationships.
Yeah.
How do you think that all of the trend to hybrid affects the dynamics of the mentoring relationships within organizations? And you can speak either to law firms or more generally as you see fit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it kind of goes to what we've been talking about in that I think it's harder. It's just harder in a hybrid environment because of the fact that we are not in that organic space. We don't have that across the desk communication. I am dubious that the way we did it before is any better than the intentionality that we have to put in today. I actually think that when we take time and space and we schedule the mentor meeting, that actually is probably better for us, right? I actually think it's not something we should be sad about. I do think that we have lots of tools. Zoom is a great example, right? I work with the lawyers who do a lot of writing, and they'll tell me things like, well, I can't sit down with an associate and review the work product. Well, of course you can. You share your screen and you walk through the project. Like, it's actually more efficient to sit down and look at the screen at the same time than you sitting on that side of the desk, me over here, me leaning. Like, give me a break. This is so much better. Okay. And so if we can encourage folks to see the good, yes, it's a little harder because it needs to be scheduled. But when it's on my calendar, I won't forget. So now it's on my calendar as a reoccurring meeting, and I'm actually meeting with my mentee. Oh, imagine that, right? So I'm going to say, let's not pretend that this is bad. Let's say that things have improved because we are keeping to schedule. We have tools that make things a little bit more seamless. And I think the champions on this call, I'm curious if you agree or disagree. Is it better? Is it worse? I don't know. I think it's better. I'd love to show of hands. How many people think it's better? Do we have to be more intentional? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We got some. Yeah. Yeah. I see.
Differing views, though. We'd love to hear differing views as well. If somebody disagrees, we welcome that as well. You posed a question to me, Darien, when we spoke last that I wrote down because I thought it really got me thinking, which was the question of whether we were being effective when we took this organically, right? When we did this, when it was just organic, how effective was it?
Yeah.
It's a really interesting question.
I'm curious.
Yeah, me too. That's powerful, really powerful. It's the difference between formal and informal, and I think a lot of folks on this call know that the research shows that informal environments that in which there's informal mentoring actually tend to have higher quality mentoring relationships, but question whether you would have the same mentoring culture, the same sense of inclusiveness if you didn't have that formality and the same measurable results, whether you didn't have that. You're pointing, Darien.
I think you're right. The inclusivity is the challenge, right? The inclusivity in an organic environment, the research shows that we choose people who are like us. And that means that if we don't have diversity in our mentors in an organic relationship, often the people who are underrepresented are not going to get the mentors. So I think it is, this goes to more formal, more structured, the better.
Yes, yes, and right. I think it's a both and. I
Yes.
think you got to be encouraging both, and you have to be enabling and encouraging both of those things. And this up leveling of the skills that you're talking about, um, embracing of technology,
Yeah.
uh, expectation setting in informal, as you said before, in what you said it so beautifully. Wait, let me see if I can reset. Let me see if I heard you. This will be a good test for me. That informality does not mean unintentionality,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
So it's really, really powerful. All right, let's talk about some strategies. We talked about structure already, but what kinds of strategies and tools are effective for mentors to build strong relationships with mentees in a
Yeah. I
hybrid?
mean, I think that, right, because we're losing the organic,
Mhm.
because we are not, hop down, let's go get a coffee together, which is, does breed some more informal connection and closeness. I really believe in using some of these assessments, personality assessments, if you will, using Strengths Finder so that we can be talking about, so we don't call it Strengths Finder now, it's called Clifton Strengths. For those of you who, it used to be called Strengths Finder, they just changed it to Clifton Strengths. I think it's a wonderful, powerful tool because now we're able to talk about our good that I might not have been able to read over a video screen, right? I think that the DISC assessment, if anyone's familiar with DISC, it's a communication tool, very helpful for mentoring relationships because I don't necessarily have all the clues anymore that I used to, right? If I were seeing a person in person every day, it's much harder to read someone's body language over a Zoom screen. So a disc can get us there fast. Oh, great. I'm dealing with a D profile. I know I need to be bottom line, really direct, make these our mentor meetings really quick versus, oh, I'm dealing with an I mentor. We can jibber jabber for an hour. It'll be fine, right? So understanding different personality types and different communication styles, I think can get us to a strong relationship, quicker. But I do think that those tools are going to be particularly helpful. I also think arming folks with powerful questions, which we've talked about, but arming our mentors with really good, powerful, open-ended questions to get our mentees talking, really important, right? Making sure that our mentors understand their role is to not just tell, but see if a person can come up with their own answer, more of a coaching approach, which I know, Lisa, you get behind the coaching
Yeah.
approach to mentoring. But obviously the structure helps. I think we need to have that structured check-ins, having topics, communication topics. Because I think a lot of times our mentees think things like, I don't really know what I want to talk about. I think I'm fine. And if you have a structured topic, they'll be like, oh, I know nothing about that. Tell me about time management. I'm terrible at this. But they didn't identify their own challenge as time management. So having some structure around mentor meetings can also be helpful. Those are my ideas, but I expect that the mentor administrators and such will have a lot more ideas than just that.
Yeah. So to ask those attending if there are other tools that you found useful for engaging in a hybrid world, throw those in the chat. And as you're doing that, I just want to comment on the Strengths Finders thing because the whole concept of Strengths Finders is super powerful, right? Especially in mentoring relationships, we set goals and hopefully have a work plan that goes towards achieving those goals. And very often focusing on our shortcomings. I think solely focusing on the shortcomings is a mistake. I actually, just because I have you here, Darien, it's hearkening back to my own law firm days. And I'm thinking about as a young associate, people were like, you got to figure out how to bring in business. And my models for who was successfully bringing in business were people who I didn't identify as like me in various ways, whether it was personality, whether it was gender, whether it was inclination, whether it was how great a litigator they were or weren't, how good a schmoozer they were or they weren't, those kind of things. And if I had had strengths finders back then, thinking about how can I build that skill based on what I'm great at, I could align what the metric of, if I had wanted to, I could align what the metric of success was with what my own strengths were. I think I would have been so much more helpful. And then to have a mentor lead me through that and set goals around that would have just been transformative. So any thoughts from those in the room about other tools or even about the tools that Darien has already spoken about? Love to see that.
Yeah, and I'll just add while folks are throwing stuff in the chat, the research shows that focusing on weakness prevents failure. Focusing on strength, you have exponential performance increase. Okay, so the concept is not that you shouldn't know your weaknesses, you should. But in our traditional mentoring, we focus on 80-20, right? 80% on fixing weaknesses, 20% maybe on the stuff we're good at. The Clifton strengths development says flip the equation. Spend 80% of our time developing our natural talent and 20% of our time focusing on weakness so that we prevent failure. Because we're never going to be outstanding at something we're not naturally good at. When you focus on strengths, you have exponential performance increase. When you focus on weakness, you prevent failure. So do we have time for me to tell about a study that they did to highlight this, Lisa?
Yeah, go for it.
So the study was done out of the University of Nebraska, and it was around speed reading. So I'm just going to highlight how this works. They took 1,000 students. 500 of them could read 90 words a minute going into the study, okay? 90 words a minute. The other folks going into the study could read 350 words a minute, okay? So we had 500 students who had this natural talent and ability for speed reading, and then these other folks who didn't. They gave them all speed reading tips and techniques, tools on how to speed read. They tested their reading comprehension and speed after giving them the tools and the tips for how to speed read. The people who could read 90 words a minute increased to 150 words a minute. The people who could read 350 words a minute increased to 2,900 words a minute. When you focus on strength, you have exponential performance increase. When you focus on weakness, you prevent failure. Okay, so this really beautiful thing happens to humans when we focus on what they're good at. So if mentors could spend more time thinking about the good in their people, you're going to get so much good out of your people. Okay, so much good. Obviously, my second favorite topic is strengths. Okay.
That's just a golden nugget. I love that, Darien. Okay, some great stuff in the chat. Lauren says it's not tool specific, but we try to build community and connection in our program through monthly roundtables. We have them for mentors to get together with other mentors, mentees with other mentees. Such a great practice. Love that. Community is the community and the connection piece, just so great. Great practice. And Casey says, the mentorship program that the company I work for has all of the participants do the DISC assessment as part of the formal program. And it was really valuable for my mentor and I when we started the program. Our company also offers the Strengths Finder assessment, and most of us include them in our email signature. Ooh,
oh, that's so cool. I want to work where you work. That's great.
I love that. Susan says, I help organize mentoring programs for the Society of Hispanic Engineers. One of our mentoring mentoring tracks uses a Latino career assessment, to which she's included a link for those who are curious in the chat as well. I'll just say it for those who are watching the recording and can't access the chat. It's latinocareerassessment.com/resources/. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, so a few last thoughts before we adjourn, although there's so much more I think we could be talking about. What advice would you give mentors and mentees to maintain engagement and achieve their goals when they can only meet virtually, or maybe, once or twice a year in person?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's keeping those virtual one-on-ones. You got to keep at it. I also just think that we need to not make too big a deal out of things. It can be light. Sometimes we don't need to have a topic, and just connecting for 15 minutes can be enough, right? Well, you're gonna get what you put in. Whatever you put in, you'll get out. So the more you put in, the more you'll get out of it. But I really just I just think if we keep to a schedule, we see it on our schedule, don't move it. Honor the commitment. And I think that that's what's going to keep these relationships going, is honoring the commitment to developing another human and supporting another human. That's my advice.
I love that. I'm just going to piggyback on that if that's okay, which is don't let perfect communication be the enemy of the good. If for some reason you can't meet, although you always want to have a meeting on the calendar, so make sure never to delete it, push it forward. But the beauty of hybrid is that there are alternative forms of communication. Is you can, and I'm not saying use it as a substitute, but use it as a supplement. Hey, Darien, I saw this article, sorry we couldn't get together last week. I saw this article and I thought of you. Hey, Darien, I know you have a huge deposition next week. Just wanted to wish you luck. Or I know you had a huge deposition last week. How did it go? Um, uh, heard this podcast, thought you'd really like it. Or let's listen to this together and talk about it next time in our mentoring conversation, because I think there's a lot for us both to learn. That kind of connectivity is actually the beauty of electronic connection.
That's great. Yeah.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Okay. Final thoughts from you, Darien, oh, wait, hold on. I want to just acknowledge a couple more comments because there's such richness. Yeah, Jenny created a toolkit that gives people some prompts and templates they can use in the program. It's such a great practice, Jenny. The mentoring agreement is helpful for both parties to agree to the terms they have set for their relationship. Yes, and to continue to revisit that mentoring agreement is something that is fluid, negotiable, and really governing of that is terrific. And Jenny says, let me check on that. To say, let me check on that, I think is what you're saying. And that's really terrific. Okay, Darien, final words of wisdom, thoughts that you
My
want to share?
only thought is I love that you're here, that you are caring about the development of other humans, because that is what's going to keep our world a better place. So I'm just thrilled that you're taking time to care about others. And that is in my mind, you're, good souls in the world. So go forth, continue to do the good work.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, thank you, everybody. Before you log off, just share with us in the chat what your one takeaway from the conversation with Darien today is. That's always, we love the thank yous, but the best gift you can give somebody who gives of their time is to let them know what you've learned from them. So just one takeaway in the chat. Just keep to schedule. Beautiful. The round tables with the mentors. Stay the course. Thank you. Thank you for now. Intentionality doesn't mean formality. Beautiful. Oh, and Michelle is reminding me, thank you very much, Michelle, that our next conversation is going to be with Sarah Taylor and on September 10th, and overcoming bias in mentoring. If you want to be in touch with Darien, here is her contact information, her LinkedIn profile, so you can connect with her. We hope to see you all on September 10th. And more gold in this chat, Darien. I encourage you to take a look with people.
I see it. It's great.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your week, rest of your month. We are, as you see, taking a break for July and August, so we'll see you September 10th.